Kia ora, welcome to episode 78 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
It was another interesting week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars. First up on our news roundup, the Music of John Williams in Concert was an event that took place on Saturday of this weekend just past. An orchestral concert by Orchestra Auckland, featuring the music of John Williams, of course, which took place in the Auckland Town Hall. I mention it for two reasons. First of all, we just want to say how very much we enjoyed this event for a number of different reasons. And the announcement that came at the conclusion of the event was that a concert featuring John Williams and friends will take place in June of 2023. So this event, or one very similar to it, will be returning to the Auckland Town Hall presumably in less than 1 year's time. You can check out more information about Orchestra Auckland and other upcoming events at orchestratedevents.co.nz. You can register for updates to other similar concerts that they will be holding. They don't just play classical music, they engage in a number of other pop culture type approaches. For instance, they've got an anime orchestrated event coming up, the date is to be confirmed. You can register for updates, and an event called The Great Kiwi Songbook will be taking place at the end of this month, October the 28th.
Great event. Great to see sort of Star Wars fans turning up to this. You could see people turning up in t-shirts and apparel. You could pick out the Star Wars fans. Always great applause, great encore. It was a really great event.
Yeah, so this event, as we said, is featured the music of John Williams, his movie theme music in particular. We heard music from E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Schindler's List and so forth, but almost the entire second half was Star Wars music, and that was just fantastic. Really appreciate hearing that music played by a full live orchestra, and the Auckland Town Hall is a great venue for such an event as this. Now, since we last spoke in last week's podcast, there have been updates to the Auckland Armageddon Expo, which was due to take place on Labour weekend in Auckland. Unfortunately, this event has been cancelled for 2022 due to the uncertainty about the management of the event and an inability to get any clarity as to whether or not the event's going to actually be able to be held there. Because this is still up in the air, it's actually unclear as to whether or not this issue will be resolved before an event can be held next year, either during winter or spring. We had the winter one earlier in this year, but without clarity as to whether or not events are going to be held on this site on an ongoing basis, we don't actually know if Auckland Armageddon will be able to take place next year either at this point. Very unfortunate. Just on that note, though, I will reiterate that other Armageddon events will be taking place later in the year. Wellington at the Sky Stadium on December the 3rd and 4th, Christchurch at the new Te Pai Convention Centre, December 10th to 11th, and early next year, March 25 to 26th, the Bay Park Arena in Tauranga. This cancellation of the Armageddon Auckland Expo left the costume contest a little bit up in the air, but the organisers will be wrapping this up by holding both a Auckland regional and then a national final at the Spookers venue that will be taking place on the 23rd and 24th of October. So if you are a costumer hoping to participate in the costume event at Auckland Armageddon, you'll still be able to do so.
Audience members will not be able to attend. This is just for entrance only. The venue does not sort of have the sort of auditorium capacity, so this still lets the cosplayers that were gearing up for these events be able to participate and sort of wrap up that contest in a sort of a satisfying way. At least, maybe you might not get to go up on stage in front of an audience, but this will be live streamed, so people will be able to watch the contest virtually. So you'll still get to sort of show off, just maybe not in person, but you still get to compete, which is obviously, a core component to the competition. So for those that, because it takes months to work on these competition level costumes, and it would be gutting to sort of, about 2 or 3 weeks out, find out that the contest won't be going ahead. Sure, you'll have a very good costume, but then of course no event to wear it to, so glad that they've come up with a solution for those.
Now, historically, Star Wars costumes have been very much something we enjoy about Armageddon Expos, and we won't have the exposure to that on the convention floor this year in the absence of Auckland Armageddon, but we will personally be keeping an eye out on the live stream of that costume contest to see if there'll be any Star Wars characters represented in the lineup. Tales of the Jedi, the new animated series of shorts, which will be debuting on Disney Plus on October the 26th. And in fact, all episodes will be coming out on October the 26th, less than 3 weeks away. A new poster has been revealed in the last day or so, just sort of emphasizing the hype for this mini-series. The poster reveals Qui-Gon and Ahsoka in the center of a ensemble of all the characters that will be represented. It involves a big Jedi symbol. Quite looking forward to this, and like I say, less than 3 weeks to go before we'll be able to check out those shorts on Disney Plus.
This is interesting in that it actually overlaps with the release schedule for Andor. I was kind of convinced that they would sort of space these things out so that one would roll on to the other. But yeah, this is going to be sort of a fun, I guess, for those of us that will not have Auckland Armageddon as we perhaps expected, we'll be able to watch this because the dates are very similar.
Pretty much. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned that it overlaps with Andor. Historically, none of the major series that includes the animated series such as Bad Batch have overlapped on Disney Plus yet. But some of the minor second tier, not that they're lower quality or anything, such as Visions, I think have overlapped, and this one will be doing that. But speaking of Visions, a preview on StarWars.com has just come out of the Star Wars Vision comic from Marvel. Issue 1 will be released on October the 12th. Might take a day or two more to show up in New Zealand. But interesting to see the character Ronan returning in a comic format. The official synopsis for this comic reads, "And a new story written and illustrated by Takashi Okazaki, one of the artists behind The Duel. Marvel's Star Wars Visions one-shot finds the Ronin before he arrived in a small town to face an agent of the dark side. In StarWars.com's exclusive preview of this issue, thieves stop the wandering warrior unaware of the mistake they've made."
This character was definitely one of the standouts for fans from that Vision series. It's interesting to see that it seems certainly prominent in the follow-up merchandise, such as the sort of Kotobukiya statue. We've seen T-shirts and Funko Pops.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise to see that they are continuing that by creating sort of a story around it with a comic. I would find it fascinating if this one got a larger spin-off component in the follow-up Vision series.
Yeah.
We still don't know whether Visions sort of 2 will follow, whether there'll be all new stories or whether we will see perhaps continuations of the most popular ones.
Not clearly.
It wouldn't surprise me if there was perhaps a part 2 to Ronan's story in Visions, even if the rest of it's completely new. Clearly, the animation style, the character design, it was a really intriguing character. So I'm definitely keen to check out this comic.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Ronin had his spin-off novel as well, so clearly stories are being created based on this character. So as you say, he is the most likely candidate to have further stories in the next season of Star Wars Visions on Disney+. Check out this preview on StarWars.com if you haven't already. It very much, because of the involvement of the original artists, obviously it very much captures the style and feel of the animated episode that was part of the Disney Plus run. Yeah, it looks great. Check it out. Moving on to product announcements and store reports. Hasbro Pulse Con 2022 took place over the past week. We watched this live stream. We mentioned it last week, and in fact we were able to watch it live streamed here from New Zealand despite the slightly confusing explanation for the availability of the live stream. A number of the Vintage Collection and Black Series figures were revealed, and the upcoming pipeline figures for both those scales were also revealed, as well as a few role-play items.
Perhaps the confusing description of the sort of they talked about fans from the UK and these places can sort of watch it on YouTube. I was worried initially that it would be regional locked, even though none of the other ones have been and we've always been able to watch it. Perhaps this is an effort to gently shoo away fans from other territories that do not have a sort of a localized Hasbro website to be able to pre-order, because they really hype up the fact, this is going to be available for pre-order, and they were very happy that they had expanded their European territories. Obviously, we've got US and Canada. Here in New Zealand, yes, we can pre-order these things from the American website if you use a freight forwarding service.
And we've done so. It does work. Yeah.
It is an expensive way to do it, obviously, because you're playing shipping twice and just, freighting from these personal shopper services just to be courier, not standard email. So you do get that sort of higher cost. Obviously, we do hope that most of these things turn up locally. Generally, distribution's been a little bit better in the past years than it has been historically. So we're hoping to see all of these announced things available locally, but they're not available for pre-order yet. So initially, eventually these things will show up at the places that offer pre-orders like Toyco and Mighty Ape and the like. And then eventually most of these will show up at the likes of Farmers and the Warehouse. But yeah, so they do sort of really hone in the fact of pre-ordering. So I think that was why that was just sort of a weird wording about how you would be able to watch Pulse Con.
So in the vintage collection line, we're excited to see Cassian Andor, comes with the blaster pistol, and Val Sartha, comes with the blaster rifle. And also from the Bad Batch, Hunter, coming with a blaster pistol, blaster rifle, removable helmet, and knife. First Bad Batch character in the TVC scale. In the sort of Army Builder series, Cantina Band 3.75-inch scaled pack featuring 7 figures and an assorted instruments will be a Hasbro Pulse exclusive. They're a bit harder to get in New Zealand unless you order direct from Hasbro Pulse. But interesting that they are doing this full set of 7 Bith band members, having recently just released one of the characters individually on a bubble card. In the TVZ pipeline, upcoming characters will be focusing on the Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary celebrations. Darth Vader, Wiki, Woof, Yakface, Nikto, Cathaba, the Skithgard, and from the Book of Boba Fett, a Tusken warrior. And in the playset arena, we'll be seeing an Andor Bunga playset, presumably one of those sort of flat pack playsets that Hasbro's been focusing on for diorama building. The Yakface is an interesting insertion into there because the Yakface on a TVC card recently or semi-recently was available with the sail barge, and I'm not sure to what extent that will be different, but that does make it more likely that you would want to have kept or keep your Yakface from your sail barge on his card.
I feel sorry for the people that kind of went up backwards and forwards about this and perhaps opened it.
Yep.
Now finding out that it's probably, they didn't confirm, they didn't mention this, but it's probably going to be the same sculpt. I don't think they would retool it only after a couple of years. Time, yeah. So yeah, the paintwork might be slightly different, but it's essentially going to be the same figure in a widely available format. So
I'm not a fan of the pack-in figures that really leaves you in this uncomfortable situation of deciding whether or not you want to open them to have the character part of the display, because it's designed to be incorporated into whatever vehicle or playset that it comes with, or keep it on the card because that's the only way to get it. And this conundrum has been made even more complicated when the figure is actually released down the line, and you may feel that you've made the wrong decision.
It's kind of interesting that we haven't seen Hasbro ever create a sort of a card back packaging that is reminiscent of the large jumbo scale of Gentle Giant, where it's kind of, you can open it up and take the figure out, and then you can kind of clamshell it back together and put that would be an interesting design feature if they decided to do something like that for these sort of exclusive figures with the large HasLab vehicles, where you sort of have a
resealable bubble card.
Yeah. So if you want to display it, so because it's just plastic, it scales down, it's sort of, you've got sort of it kind of overlaps at the back. So you can sort of put the two pieces of plastic together. So you essentially sort of seal the figure with the sort of backing card there for display purposes, and you can take it out. That's one of the reasons why I particularly liked those jumbo sort of renditions of the original Kenner figures, was you didn't have to choose. The backing cards are huge because they're like a backing card for a 12-inch figure. So you end up with these huge backing cards. Well. But they look really cool if you pull them out and sort of put all the figures together, because it has that sort of really nostalgic retro feel. Yep. And you didn't have to decide. You weren't literally ripping the bubble off a giant, 12-inch backing card. So they created this way that you could sort of take them off. And I think that would be an interesting way to do the pack-in. It would certainly sort of dampen the sort of the resale market here, not make it, because a lot of people, I guess, decided to sell that pack-in figure to sort of offset the cost of the sale barge. Yeah, knowing that these are like exclusive versions of the figures and things like that. If you could just take them on and off, I think then people wouldn't be torn, because there would be some people that bought the sale barge that perhaps went and additionally tracked down this figure on the secondary market so they could have two, one loose to use with their sale badge and one carded in the sort of original pack-in exclusive sort of condition.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting that they're going to do this because that's going to make people perhaps hold on to their pack-in HasLab figures for a lot longer in case they turn around and do this. Not that we even know what potentially the next HasLab Star Wars project will be after the last two failures.
Maybe a while before we find out.
But going forward, for those of you that may end up securing a HasLab Star Wars vehicle of some description, this is an interesting development to take note of.
In the Black Series, a run of Andor characters. Cool to see Andor coming through. Bix Kayleen, Luthen Rael, and Mon Mothma. Axe-Woves will also be inserted in there from The Mandalorian. And in the Return of the Jedi line on retro cards, so bubble cards, but Black Series 6-inch scale, will be seen a Scout Trooper, Lando Skiff Guard, Han Solo with his Endor trench coat, Princess Leia in her Endor poncho, and Wicket the Ewok. In the Black Series pipeline coming up and a little bit down the line, Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, R2-D2, a new sculpt thereof, and a reissue of the Royal Guard, Emperor's Royal Guard. From the Book of Boba Fett, quite exciting to see a Pike Syndicate Trooper in the Black Series 6-inch scale, Cad Bane, a fan favourite of course, and a Tusken Chieftain, again in that Black Series 6-inch line. We're very excited to see a new Black Series helmet revealed, a Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet. Particularly excited for this for two reasons. Hasbro tends to release a lot of repaints of their Black Series helmets. This is a completely new sculpt, of course. We don't have a Clone Trooper to date, either Phase 1 or Phase 2. I'm hoping personally that the Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet coming out now implies that there will be a Phase 1 Clone Trooper down the line. Also exciting that there will be a lot of paint variants of these Clone Troopers almost undoubtedly coming out down the line, so you better get your favourite paint job represented on a life-size 1-to-1 scale Clone Trooper helmet. Now the pricing on these are fantastic for the product that you end up getting in New Zealand, about $250. This is in contrast to the other recently revealed 501st to Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet from Demuo Nova, which is about $1,000 more expensive. Higher quality materials and such like, but for the price for what you get, we're very, very happy with the Hasbro Black Series helmets that we've got in our collection.
Yes, for the collectors out there, this will be an exciting development, particularly if you're the sort of person that wants perhaps more items represented in your collection rather than focusing on the higher end, which budgetary restrictions for most of us means that you have to really pick and choose the special pieces. And yes, the 501st Clone Trooper is a special piece for a lot of people out there, but the announcement of this one from Hasbro, generally speaking, they're between $250 to $300. Like the $300 price point is generally reserved for the Vader. Most of the other helmets are somewhere between $250 and $300.
And we've got most of them in New Zealand through EB Games or Mighty Ape and other retailers.
Yeah, distribution is good in New Zealand. Widely they don't sell out too quickly, even for the popular ones
Reasonable
like Boba Fett or Darth Vader. Good to see the Darth Vader helmet showing up in large quantities at EB Games. And I think it's really fun. You know, the prequels have often got a little bit neglected because it's not an area that Disney has deemed particularly profitable. We've got a lot of focus on the original trilogy, and then we had a lot of merchandise obviously focusing around the sequel trilogy and each new film as it came out. So it's fun coming up to the 20th anniversary of sort of the Clone Wars era, with Attack of the Clones this year reaching its 20th anniversary. Obviously, in 3 years' time, we'll hit the 20th anniversary of Episode 3. So I'm really hoping the in-betweening years, the 3 years, starting now, leading up to the 20th anniversary of Episode 3, we'll see a lot more sort of prequel era merch. And one of the more popular elements of the prequels is, of course, the Clone Wars. It ties in with the animated series as well. Obviously, the sort of the micro series came in that era as well, which, added a lot more sort of clone troopers and things like that. So it'll be really exciting to see how much. Obviously, this will probably mostly be repaints. I don't know that we'll see, particularly in Episode 3, we saw a lot of variant clone trooper helmets that were not just repaints. They had different visors and different sort of breathing segments. I don't necessarily know that we'll get the variations to that extent. Perhaps we'll see a Cody with a sort of a visor that can sort of flip down. Cody being one of the sort of more prominent film clones that had a variant.
More of an add-on rather than a resculpt.
So that would be really cool. But in any case, we're bound to see a plain white one. And a fiber first one is probably a given for this one. And there's a couple of variations that we see in some of the video games. So it'd be interesting to see just how many we get. This is Hasbro. We know they love to do repaints. And
I'm sure we'll see
I think collectors will appreciate it. I know that if they release a plain white one, then people can just buy like 10 and just do their own paint jobs on them and do the variations. But it'll be fun to have officially released versions out there. So you can have like a cool sort of almost a rainbow lineup of different ones on a shelf. I think that would be really cool. And generally speaking, without making, too much predictions here, you could probably buy 4 to 5 of these for the price of one Genoa Novo. So you could get like quite a significant display. I mean, the Clone Trooper helmets are fairly big helmets. They look big when you sort of got a 1-to-1 sort of in front of you. So I think that would be really cool for fans of Clone Troopers. Really excited about this one.
Speaking about Clone Troopers and Clone Wars in general, 20th anniversary era of the Clone Wars is sort of kicking off, and at least that's how Hasbro's going to be celebrating it. They get talked about anniversary figures coming out throughout 2023. Both the Genndy Tartakovsky and Dave Filoni series will be represented in that lineup. But just jumping back to roleplay items, they also confirmed that a Black Series Luke Skywalker green lightsaber will be coming out. So this, of course, is Return of the Jedi lightsaber with the green blade. And the new Black Series sort of line up with removable blades and sort of vertical display stands, which we're very much a fan of as well.
In the past, the Luke Skywalker sort of Jedi lightsaber the design has a very narrow emitter, and generally when that has been done in a licensed light-up collectible, they had to basically give it a very wide neck in order to fit the sort of electronics in the blade. But in the recent years, Hasbro has kind of decided on a interesting compromise, starting with the sort of Princess Leia, and we have seen it in the Obi-Wan Kenobi designed lightsabers that all have that same sort of emitter style, in that they have basically the whole emitter can come off, and you can choose 2 styles. The very narrow, realistic version if you prefer to display it as a standalone hilt, or you can sort of take that piece off and have the wider neck if you want to put a blade on it. And I think that this is a really good option for collectors. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of buy 2 of it. If some people really like bladed weapons, some people want hilts, and some people want to be able to do both with their pricey collectibles. So I really like this option here. Personally, I kind of have different opinions for different lightsabers. Some of them I really want to have on a shelf accurate, and others I, want to have them sort of lit up because they're slightly more fun that way. And I like the fact that they're giving fans this option. It does tend to put the price point a little bit higher because you are getting an extra component here. You're getting essentially the whole emitter piece twice. But we do generally get these lightsabers in New Zealand from EB Games, Mighty Ape, and a couple of the Australian stockists also have very good pricing, even shipped to New Zealand. So this is quite cool. Obviously, Luke is getting his moment with his appearance in The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. So it wasn't surprising to see this, especially now that Hasbro's figured out that sort of emitter problem. Just jumping back, as you said, to the Clone Wars era, this was particularly exciting to me that they was kind of giving it, they stressed that this was like sort of a generic Clone Wars. It wasn't specifically the Dave Filoni Clone Wars. They even presented a new logo for it was sort of like Clone Wars 20, and it sort of had a Clone Trooper helmet that didn't seem specifically drawn from one specific source. I thought that was really interesting that Hasbro have kind of created this. I assume we might even see it expanded, seeing this Clone Wars 20. This might be a Lucasfilm initiative to celebrate the Clone Wars sort of 20th anniversary, because obviously the Clone Wars, as we know, it was kind of kicked off by Attack of the Clones in 2002. We're now hitting that 20-year anniversary, and there is a lot of content that told stories from the Clone Wars period. Obviously, we see it in episode 2 and 3, the 2 different animation series as we see it here. So it'll be really interesting to see if this is a broader merchandising initiative or this is something that Hasbro wants to do, because clone troopers are popular. There is a lot to do here, and I think it's a fun time for prequel fans, for people that love the Clone Wars, whether you like all of the animated series or perhaps you discovered Star Wars with Filoni's series, and that is like the thing that really drew you to Star Wars. It's neat to see. I almost can't believe it's been 20 years, you know. It's just like, whoa, we're hitting this period, you know. I'm too young to sort of appreciate
I remember
the original trilogy sort of ones. Obviously, I'm impressed, you know, we're hitting 40 years on some of these films and stuff like that. But, you know, I was coming up into Star Wars in the prequel era. That was when I was old enough to appreciate it. And so it's really interesting seeing all these 20th anniversaries. It's really sort of hitting home just how much of my life that this has been a part of. And so I'm very excited. I'm hoping that we'll see some of the pieces. They didn't reveal anything for this sort of Clone Wars 20 thing. They just kind of said that we'll be celebrating it. Obviously,
no details yet.
The Clone Trooper helmet is like obviously going to be part of that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what else, because it's not very often that we actually see Clone Trooper action figures on shelves. A little while ago, we had the 501st Clone Trooper that seemed to tie in. It wasn't specifically branded as being from Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the
vintage collection.
Sorry. The action figures on shelves locally. That actually sort of came out a bit before the Obi-Wan Kenobi figures, though obviously that does fit in with that sort of time period and the flashback scenes that we saw in that series. So that was kind of cool, but it's been a long time. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I've seen a Attack of the Clones era Clone Trooper action figure on a TVC.
I'd like to see the Black Series as well, just playing Clone Troopers. It's time for them to come back up.
Yes, it's been a little bit then. But let's jump back and talk about some of the other action figure reveals here, what our favorites are, anything unusual that we think in that lineup.
That's 4 characters from Andor in the Black Series lineup, and I'm the pictures of them look great. They come with cool accessories. They've got nicely sculpted apparel in general. Fun to see Mon Mothma but Luthen Rael. They're cool characters. I'm really getting into Andor, so I'm really stoked to see that a reasonable sort of start to the Black Series line for them. As well as those announcements from Hasbro, just a quick note, I know that I think they're Walmart exclusives in the US. There's an Andor in his Aldani disguise, which we get to see on Disney Plus, and also a Imperial officer that is describing him as being from the Dark Times era. But yeah, those are Walmart exclusives in the US, but they're recently revealed as well.
Obviously included in the sort of the figures that they had there on hand to sort of show off in person on the video stream was Andor with his droid. The droid is only available in that sort of exclusive 2-pack.
Convention exclusive.
I'm hoping that down the line we will see him revealed. Like, I can understand they'll be like, get the exclusive because they want that to sell and they want that to be all the sort of buzz. And then later down the line, they're like, oh yes, and here are the 2 figures available separately. We had this. I remember back, I can't remember what year it was, but when the First Order Stormtrooper was first revealed, it was like a Comic-Con exclusive or something like that. And there were stories of people getting basically shanked with pins in the queue because people were so frantic to get this figure. And then all it turned out...
sequel trilogy character released in
and it was like... this frenzy to try and get hold of this figure. And then in the end, all it turned out to be was just the packaging was unique. The First Order Stormtrooper was widely available in the standard Black Series packaging. And I'm hoping that that's the case here. Hasbro doesn't necessarily say that they will be available in just standard packaging later. They want there to be this buzz. They want people to sort of buy it out. So it always looks bad if you do a convention exclusive and it doesn't sell out. You know, it always kind of looks bad. And then you've got all this inventory and then people get mad that they waited in line for hours and hours to get a hold of it, and then it's just on the website later. So I'm sure that this is a bit of a buzz just to make sure that it sells out and it's all buzzy and you know, generates sort of good revenue for them as well as, you know, sort of a good sort of convention exclusive. You know, as a brand, you want people to be excited and to grab your exclusives and stand in line and all that kind of stuff. So very much hoping that droid will be available locally because he's super cute.
Well, a couple of other observations based on the characters we were just talking about. Hunter is the first Bad Batch in TVC scale. That strongly implies that we'll see the rest of the Bad Batch in TVC scale. We almost always, well, I don't think there's been any exceptions to the statement that when they do one Bad Batch, they do them all the way through from Funko through to Hot Toys.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, well, it's, you don't want to run that risk of I know that some brands have done this where they start releasing characters from a team and then it kind of like just just trails out and you never get the rest of the team. I know that there was some controversy with the Hot Toys sort of Avengers squad, that there are some characters missing from that. Ones that were sort of promised and then kind of never came out, and people are like, it's been like how many years later and we still don't have a full set. So, the way that Hasbro has been consistently working on the Bad Batch in the Black series line, I'm fairly certain that revealing them in the TVC line means that we'll get all of them there. It's a popular ongoing series. I guess this is kind of in line with the release schedule. Obviously, the Bad Batch has been delayed. We now have sort of a new air date, so this will perhaps line up with that as we sort of see characters sort of trickling out, and it will sort of line up with that new release schedule, because we know that
there's differences in their armor between season 1 and season 2.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see.
Season 1 armor.
Yeah.
We're not far off possibly seeing season 2 Bad Batch merchandise coming up as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting there.
The other prediction we can sort of infer from this description, this lineup of characters, is that in the vintage collection from Book of Boba Fett, they've got the female Tusken warrior, and in the Black series, they've got the Tusken chieftain. Almost certainly we'll see the reverse of that available as well, because Hasbro has been tending to release the same characters in both scales, so we'll probably see the Tusken warrior in Black series scale and the Tusken chieftain, and vintage collection line. I certainly hope that's the case. I'm a Tusken Raider fan from way back when. I loved the vintage, the original vintage Tusken Raider mini action figure, and just seeing these, seeing Tusken Raiders represented with a bit more variety in their sort of apparel I found really quite a cool aspect of Book of Boba Fett.
In the pipeline with the Book of Boba Fett Pike Syndicate Trooper, I have to wonder that they kind of missed an opportunity. The speeder bikes that they steal so that you could have that sort of viral moment displayed on your shelf, with Boba on it going like a bantha. And then, of course, an actual bantha. Even if they just went back into the archives and reissued whatever the last bantha was that they made, and just put it there back out on shelves. And then, of course, Boba Fett on his Rancor. I saw this in the comments of the live stream a lot, that people wanted creatures and people were saying, why no vehicles, why no creatures? And there was a fair amount of creatures in the sort of live action series like Book of Boba Fett. There is a bantha, a prominent bantha. It's Boba's bantha. I think that would be really cute. If they're going to do Tuskens and banthas are just like,
blurgs.
It's,
yeah.
Why are they not doing it? It seems a real shame. And then the playset, I saw some people that are sort of a little bit cynical about the Andor bunker playset, worried that you will need to buy 2 of them to make it sort of, a more significant component, the way that we saw the Navarra Cantina. They're like, here's one wall, and then if you really want to make a scene, you got to buy 2 of them. I'm hoping that the Andor bunker playset is, we hope that it's a little bit more than the versions that we've seen in the past, where it's just sort of the front face. They kind of showed it from the side. Just the picture of the set.
Yeah, it's not revealed yet. They showed the graphic that they used to represent it,
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if this will actually have multiple sides that will click together, or whether you'll basically sort of get like half of it and you'll need to buy a couple of them.
It's
sort of click it all together to make it a big one.
So far we've had Jabba's Palace, Blockade Runner Corridor, and the Navarro Cantina in this sort of format. And most of those lend themselves to having both an interior and an exterior, but I'm not quite sure how they will represent the interior and exterior for the indoor bunker, and like say whether or not they'll be able to join together. Obviously, you didn't need to join them together for the Jabba's Palace, but they did have side panels that could be laid out flat for just a flat diorama backdrop, or they could be put at right angles for a bit more of a 3-dimensional display.
I mean, in a cheap sense, you can just do sort of, the 4 walls and a roof. I can imagine them even just having sculpted doors that are shut, just to stand figures in front of it.
Back in the day, there was a sort of an adventure playset that was a little bit 2-dimensional on the Power of the Force 2 lineup. It came with quite a few figures, as they did with those lineups back then. But the bunker from that, it's fairly flat, but it's just got a little bit of depth to it. They may be taking that sort of approach. That is a cool backdrop for displays on the whole.
Yeah.
But but the price has been creeping up on these sort of flat pack play sets. So I hope we get money for value for money from this Andor bunker.
The other thing that sort of stood out to me is the Black Series characters here that they've got. They've obviously got ones that kind of tie in to the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi with sort of Biker Scout, Lando Skiffguard, Endor, Han and Leia, and Wicket. And I saw this in the comments that people were like, every time you do the Endor characters, they end up being pig warmers. And it's just like, you don't know why. You don't know why. Like, even Han, you know, this is like, he's a leading character. And, you know, and Ewoks, you know, they're a crucial component of Return of the Jedi, but they never sell at full price. People always wait. Possibly because people are just a little bit better at paying for half of the plastic at the same price. These things they're always the same price. And Black Series have been sneaking up there in price. And you're like, well, I'm getting half a figure because, you know, the Ewoks are a lot smaller. So you wonder whether people just like deliberately,
by showing how many accessories it came with. And
but the bubble looked ridiculous because he was all the way down the bottom and then just a couple of like bows and arrows across the top and
sticks basically. So
they're tiny, yeah. But you know that it's going to be full price on the shelves, and so you know that these end up being pig warmers, and fans hate pig warmers because the stores don't really care what the character is. They just see that they're a Star Wars product on the shelf that doesn't sell, and that affects the ability to get in new waves.
Wow.
So that's a little bit, I know that they're going to have to for the 40th anniversary. There are people that want these things that don't have them.
Looks really cool, but the others, I think they're gonna hit clearance locally at some point.
Yeah. Scout Troopers are always army builders, so that's going to be like the first to disappear off the shelf, unlike the freaking metallized figures that were still sitting on shelves locally. The standard Biker Scout will sell well. But yeah, I just wish that there was more than just figures here, a vehicle or something like that. Obviously, with Jazzwares hitting New Zealand, we're getting our sort of Star Wars vehicle fix that way. But for those of us sort of OG 4-inch scale collectors, it's just that sort of scratch that just you want it there, like you want,
it needs to be scratched,
you know, like some speeder bikes. Like honestly, like we're thinking way back, we got
just a
we got
Black
Emphas
Series.
Nest on her speeder.
Yes, we did.
So but the speeders in that kind of felt like
that was in the Black Series scale, both scales, but that went to clearance as well many times. But I reckon a book of Boba Fett in his jumpsuit on his speeder.
That would have been funny, you know. I think people would have bought that just for the fact that it made them laugh, you know. I think it's cool. You know, that's a variant of Boba Fett that hasn't been on the shelves. You know, we've got a few variants of Boba Fett and the Mandalorian, you know, sitting around on shelves in clearance. But that was something different, something unique. He's in his jumpsuit for most of those flashbacks, and we don't really have that sort of version.
Yeah.
I think that would have been fun.
All right. It would have been. I don't know how it would have necessarily sold and overall, but I personally would have gone for it.
But jumping across from those ones, very excited to see a decent amount of product from Andor. It felt like Obi-Wan, we didn't really get much at all from it. You know, I'm still hanging out for my little Leia, you know, action figure for the series, you know, like we don't have that for any range.
Yeah, she
there isn't a Funko, there isn't a Black Series, there isn't a 4-inch scale. Like, what? She's a core component of the series, and then there's no merchandise for her. At least with Andor, we're getting some of these new characters pretty early on. We're seeing Bix. We don't actually know you know, where these characters are going to go, how significant they're going to be in the series, but at least they had, we're seeing the characters that have had at least prominent episodes, whether or not we see any more of them. So, you know, we've got Mon Mothma in her new outfit. It's very exciting. I know in the past, Mon Mothma often ends up being one of those sort of not actiony characters, so the kids don't want them, so they end up being a little bit of a pig warmer, but she's shaping up to be very significant in the Andor series. She's significant for the rebellion anyway, so I'm very excited to see that they didn't shy away from putting her there.
Yeah, I think we're going to be quite completionist when it comes to Black Series Andor figures.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. Yeah.
I think, just speaking for just the two of us here, I like the Black Series when it's it feels self-contained by a specific source material. And because these sort of television series are sort of more encapsulated, when it comes to just sort of trying to collect all Black Series. It feels easier to sort of focus on a particular source. So when it was things like the Bad Batch, we're like, aha, we can sort of focus in on this without sort of collecting all of them. I know we've certainly seen it locally that people sort of try to collect all of the Black Series, and it just ends up becoming a bit of a drain either on your wallet or on your bookshelf in terms of space, and it's easier to focus on. Some people decide, okay, I'm only going to go original trilogy, and that's a useful sort of way to sort of frame it. Or other people are like, I'm not going to collect variants or special packaging or whatever in an effort to try and sort of hone down or something like that. The other thing, it's not necessarily a reveal here, but they did show the packaging, and they are pushing for the non-plastic Black Series where it's just got a picture. And I know certainly I've got my own feelings about this, and I could see the comments based, from the fans in the chat, that people were like, I want to keep my figures carded, and you were kind of taking that. Yeah. Like if you're a Black Series collector,
cutting down
I've got a bunch of Black Series that I haven't opened because I like the way that they're in their bubble. And I'm like, I know I'm going to do it eventually, but I'm just kind of enjoying the way that they look. The presentation, that cool art down the side. Yes, I know there's a lot of plastic, but it's not like plastic straws, like it's part of the product.
The key thing is cutting down plastic makes sense if it's just going to go in the bin as soon as it gets home, because that's the issue. There's stuff going into the environment or to the, into landfill, but
there would be a way of doing a cardboard.
It's a weird presumption.
Like the characters sort of stored on cardboard, but having at least a window to see at least maybe the upper body. There are plenty of toys on store shelves that you can touch the figure. They're not behind a completely sort of window.
That far for the Black Series, but
they could do a small plastic window. Just a small plastic window, but the character is actually housed on a cardboard or something like that. I know that people were upset because if you have it completely enclosed, then that takes away the fun of keeping things carded because you can't see the figure anymore. It's, it's sort of like Schrodinger's cat, is it an empty box or is there a figure inside? You'll never know, but for those of us that struggle with the decision to keep Black Series carded or to open them, this kind of takes out that equation. We don't need to buy two. You can take the figure out of the box, put the box on the shelf, and it looks like a carded figure because you can't actually see it. And then you've got the figure somewhere else.
This whole move is based on the presumption that people don't want to keep things in their packaging. I think
which
that's
is
straight up
odd.
wrong.
That feels like Hasbro is completely out of touch with collectors. Black Series is for adult collectors. I don't think there is that many people out there. Maybe some very wealthy people that are flinging $40 and $60 figures at their 7-year-old to play with. But I've got to be honest, I think Black Series is for collectors. And collectors, no matter what it is, there are people that keep it in their boxes. There are people out there that just, whatever their passion is, they want to keep it in their box. There are stuff out there that's like Mr. Potato Head that's been AFA graded, because it's a Star Wars variant, let's grade this toy. Perhaps that's not everyone's bag, but that's like, there are still collectors out there that want to keep things in their packaging. Angry Birds Star Wars mashup toys, that's still floating around on the internet, still in its boxes. And I think it's odd to make something that is specifically designed to be collectible not really able. I mean, most people know, the vintage vehicles and things like that, they didn't have windows, that's all fine.
The proof in the fact that people want to keep these in their boxes is the fact that you can buy plastic cases, either thin plastic or even rigid acrylic, to put your Black Series figures in.
Yeah, which is additionally buying more plastic.
That's going to make no sense for a windowless figure. Anyway.
Or if you're going to do that, if you're like, well, what about all the people that want to put their Black Series on the shelf? Just do 2 packaging lines or something like that. Here's one for the collectors. I mean, we saw that with we see it with skateboards and we see it with sneakers. There are some where they're like literally blister carded for the sort of collectible nature. And then we saw ones that are just in a standard shoebox. If you want to wear your shoes, here's the standard shoebox. You want to keep it as a collectible, here it is, vax sealed on a blister card so you can put it on your wall. And we see that with skateboards. We see what they call shred ready, where it's just, a thin film of shrink wrap around the board so you can rip it open, put the wheels on it and go out and skate, or have it on a cool collectible backing card so you can put it on your wall and go, ooh, look, it's all sealed, it's a collectible. You could do the same thing with action figures. Here's like collectible version and here's the one for the people, just like you could, like the army builders are basically plain brown cardboard with a little line art on the outside. You could take that approach.
They're designed for dioramas.
Absolutely no glossy print, just line art on the front and go, this is a Boba Fett figure. Here's a line art of it on the outside. Rip open your brown cardboard box and away you go. And the people that want to have it on the shelf have it in like a cool, I don't get it. You don't see Funko trying to take the windows out of their boxes. Everyone knows that Funko collectors are split in box or out of box, but the window and the plastic packaging on the inside is necessary for the people that want to keep them in their boxes. And they are taking that. I can imagine the riots if Funko took the windows and plastic out of their packaging. People would be like, what's the point?
That wouldn't work.
Initially, I wasn't sure if the Black Series was going to stick around. It was a bit of an experiment by Hasbro, but it has. It's lasted, and I think people are invested in it, and making a decision like this that could potentially affect the financial success of the series puts it at jeopardy. If these figures don't sell well, then Hasbro will make slightly less of them a year, or go back to only doing figures that they know will sell, like Darth Vader or something like that. And that's upsetting for fans. And I see the people that were getting very upset in the chat, and and
it's not because you don't care about the plastic. I just think it's a wrong move in terms of the marketing of this product.
I get it for toys that are destined for children, like the little $10 jobs at Kmart that we saw, where they were just a cardboard box with a figure inside, no plastic on it apart from the figure itself. I get that, kids gonna rip open their toys and play with them, and that plastic will end up in the rubbish bin. But for collectibles, leave that up to collectors. We're not just throwing away. I can't even, I've got far too many backing cards and cardboard boxes taking up a lot of space because I can't bring myself to throw away Star Wars packaging. And I think there would be people out there as well. Even though you display your figures loose, you've still got an awful amount of packaging, stacked up in your garage somewhere, because it's kind of part of the collectible, especially the higher price point. We're starting to pay a bit for some of these figures. You don't want to just throw away the packaging, because everyone knows that if something happens in your life, for whatever reason, you end up selling these things on, whether by choice or sort of, life forces your hand for financial reasons, things are just worth a lot more when you've got the original packaging. And I think, a lot of us are keeping their packaging whether or not we store them. This is not ending up in landfill. Anyway, that was a rant. But I saw that as a particular hotbed issue, and I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it.
I just want to talk briefly about a upcoming Funko line, or second wave of a line, that I'm really quite excited about. The Star Wars Retro Comic Style Pops Figure Wave 2. Previously, we saw Darth Vader, Stormtrooper, C-3PO, and Luke Skywalker released. So these are figures that are painted up to look like vintage Marvel Star Wars comic covers. So they've got sort of black outline sort of impressions on them, as well as some of the funky colouring that we saw on those vintage Marvel Star Wars comics. I really, really liked those. The second wave is available for pre-order in New Zealand. It includes Chewbacca, Emperor Palpatine, R2-D2, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi comes from a cover where he's actually got sort of burgundy robes, which is really quite funky but cool.
Yeah, that Obi-Wan, as soon as I see it, I see that cover, Obi-Wan fights alone, It's just like, I think that these are really fun, We've seen him in action figure form, but there's something about the Funko design that just meshes with these sort of bright colours really well.
They go together. They're very cool. They go together quite fun as a cool subset. So this is the second wave. I'm predicting that there'll be a third wave, because we don't have Han Solo, Princess Leia, Lando Calrissian, or Boba Fett yet, and I think those ones are going to be represented because they've all shown up on vintage covers with quite cool colour variations as well.
Yeah, and
to go beyond that, we'd have to start introducing some of the secondary characters that we only saw in the comics, like Valance or Jackson or Baron Tag, and that would require a new sculpt, which I think we're less likely to see in this line. Although I think there is a set of people that would like to see Jackson the Green Rabbit that actually showed up in issue 8. He was one of the first. Most Star Wars vintage comics just featured the main heroes and villains, but issue 8, which was pretty soon after the run of the original comic adaptation of the first film, had this Green Rabbit on the cover.
We saw a collectible piece of Jackson revealed at Celebration, so obviously Disney is not completely averse to featuring it in collectibles. A Funko version would be kind of fun. Yeah. I do really like the fact that this range has themed boxes.
The back of the
tie
boxes
into it as
the
well.
back of the boxes shows the cover that the figure is inspired by.
But they're not the standard white sort of Funko boxes. It's very much all bright and colourful. I think they tend more towards the black colouring of the boxes, so they look really cool when you've got them all together. This is definitely one of those sort of repaints that I'm not mad at. I really like them. I think that they're cool.
So yes, Wave 2 coming out up for pre-order locally, and I'm predicting a Wave 3 that will include Han Solo, Princess Leia, Lando Calrissian, and there's a cool Boba Fett comic cover that comes from the Empire Strikes Back adaptation, where he's got quite an interesting variation on his paint job. Standing next to him actually is Bosk wearing a purple flight suit and some variations of the comic. I don't think we'll get that one there, but that would be kind of fun. Right, just rounding out our store reports, I want to mention EB Games there. EB Games, as most of you are familiar, have been getting over the last few years a lot of quite exclusive product stuff that they're having manufactured specifically for sale in their stores in Australia and New Zealand. And we're seeing some cool Andor specific products coming through. The overall lineup of new apparel in particular is interesting. We've seen some new button-up shirts for $59, which is pretty cool. They're short-sleeve button-up collared shirts. There's one that features Mandalorian helmets, and a woman's cut one that features a repeating Grogu image. I think that's a fair price for something that's a little bit smarter if you want to have some slightly different Star Wars apparel in your wardrobe. We were quite impressed by the basketball-style singlets. $49. There's two versions, one featuring a Jedi Warriors sort of presumed team and one featuring a Galactic Empire team. So the Sith Lords versus the Jedi Warriors. They have player numbers on the back. Obi-Wan Kenobi 77 for the Jedi Warriors team, and Darth Vader 66 for the Sith Lords team. We like these a lot.
Yeah, these are fun. We've seen a couple of companies do sort of the take on sort of basketball athletic shirts in the past, but these are very fun. Obviously, black and red with 66 is very fun and a reasonable price point. Generally, these have been quite expensive offerings in the past from, I think, the likes of Black Milk, and I think ThinkGeek way back when did something similar as well. So very cool. Perfect in time for summer. Along with those button-up shirts, it's not quite sort of the garish Hawaiian shirt vibe. I think they're more sort of stylish than that. I'm pretty sure that these are going to be trendy. We've seen a couple of button-up shirts from EB Games that they obviously sell well because they're doing some more. Some
of the designs being too subtle almost, but these ones are quite fun.
Yes.
So alongside the Andor product we're starting to see at EB Games, there's been a bunch of Bad Batch stuff, almost paired. So we're seeing caps for $25, both Andor and Bad Batch, enamel pins for $12, both Andor and Bad Batch. We've also got an Andor wallet, Bad Batch socks. And one thing that really quite struck me is a new t-shirt design that has graphics on the front and back. It's a red t-shirt, but is Andor branded for $29. And the thing that really kind of struck me is that it features a Stormtrooper graphic on the back. So quite interesting seeing Stormtroopers represented under the Andor logo at this point.
Yeah. I'm hoping we see more because, Stormtroopers are just so iconic, such a classic piece of Star Wars, and whether or not you're sort of up to speed on Andor, it's just fun to see more Stormtrooper merch out there. You don't have to sort of, it's just something that just about every Star Wars fan is, unless you're very staunchly light side. Stormtrooper merch kind of appeals to everybody, so very cool to see these stocked locally.
All right, let's move on to talk about episode 4 of Andor. Episode 4 was entitled Aldhani. Now, there's a good chance you've actually watched episode 5 by the time you're listening to this podcast. We do wait a week at least before we talk about the episodes, just in case you haven't had an opportunity to. But if you want to catch up on our conversations about episode 5, you can jump on over to our personal YouTube channel. That's Villa Varakino, VaryKino for Varakino, where we put up our immediate post-episode Twitch streams talking about episode 5, but wait a week, early next week, around about Tuesday, we will be talking about episode 5. Okay, so let's talk about episode 4 here and now, though. Episode 4 is the first episode directed by Susanna White. The first episodes 1, 2, and 3, which was a bit of a circumscribed chapter, were directed by Toby Haynes. Susanna White is slated to direct episodes 4, 5, and 6, so I'm getting the impression that episodes 4, 5, and 6 will be a bit of a circumscribed chapter in their own right, telling a bit of a story arc that'll wrap up as a sort of self-sustained chapter. So a quick summary, and then we'll talk about the things that really stood out to us. Luthen Rail takes Cassian to the planet Aldani, so we open on a starscape with Rail's starship. A big fan of that starship design as a side point. I probably mentioned that before. And he explains his sabotage mission that he's trying to recruit Cassian for. Cassian's reluctant, but eventually agrees. Rail asks him to use a pseudonym among the rebels. He chooses the name Clem, which was the name of his adopted father. They land on the planet Aldani in a sort of open area that's presumably quite distant from the Imperial garrison that they're going to be committing the heist on. Luthen explains the necessity of adding Cassian into the heist to Val, the rebel group's leader, who subsequently introduces him to the rest of the group, but keeps Luthen Rail's involvement a secret. That's a little bit of an interesting dynamic that I hope they unpack a little bit later. They explain to Cassian that they plan on stealing the payroll of an Imperial garrison from a key Imperial supply hub by taking advantage of a interesting natural phenomenon in Aldani's sky to escape, which is going to give them sort of cover in terms of tracking their vehicle, because they're going to be using a cargo hauler basically as a getaway vehicle. Parallel to this, on Coruscant, Luthen Rail, who has just returned, he's posing as an art dealer, we believe. Interesting that he's leading these two quite distinct lives. He meets with Senator Mon Mothma and they discuss challenges in keeping the opposition to the Empire hidden. Cyril Khan, meanwhile, the deputy inspector from Morlana, visits his mother after being castigated and placed on leave. The Imperial Security Bureau Lieutenant Deidre Miro seeks access and authority over the Ferrix incident, but is faced with opposition from her colleagues and superiors. She's an interesting character who seems to be quite observant and is noticing what seems to be a pattern forming in terms of rebel activity in Imperial sectors, but no one's listening to her, paying heed to her within the Imperial Security Bureau at this point, so that's clearly going to develop. So this feels like the start of a chapter, and we presume it's going to span 3 episodes. And we're seeing these distinct story threads for each of the sets of characters being set up, and presumably they'll all intersect down the line.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting that we saw Khan. I thought after the sort of events on Ferrix that was sort of going to be perhaps the last.
I wanted
to see more of him, and it was kind of exciting to see. We see the scenes of sort of the Imperials basically scolding them and basically firing them, basically congratulating them for being so incompetent that they brought about the end of the private security force on the planet. And now that the Imperial they've taken over permanent control of the planet, the sector.
Yeah, Morlana and Ferrix, yeah.
Yeah, so some of the other officers that we saw prominently from that force are also basically getting fired and scolded, and it's kind of interesting. We see him in what looks to be not exactly the most glamorous of housing, sort of having to return to his mother with 2 small suitcases, and he looks pretty dejected, and he's met initially with a slap from his mother. That's an interesting dynamic, hoping we see more of his story, obviously giving us that little glimpse.
Well, we obviously will.
I'm hoping that that it's not just here's what happened to him. I think somehow his story is going to come back around and tie in. Either he is going to cross paths with the rebels or the Empire, or something interesting is going to...
I'm feeling like we're getting the setups of what's happening back on Morlana and Ferrix, what's happening on Coruscant, what's happening with Cyril Khan, what's happening on Aldani. These paths are all going to intersect in an interesting way. But I'm really glad that Cyril Khan is still in the loop. I think the actor and the character is superb to watch.
He does a lot with his expressions,
and he's really conveying a lot about the character and the character's backstory with short scenes. Sometimes I'm loving that aspect to it, because obviously Stellan Skarsgård, I love him as an actor and the character he's portraying here, and he's doing a very fun job of playing 2 distinct personalities. But often often his sort of rebel character is just characterized by being, stern and authoritative and strong. But
he sort of like growls at Val when she goes to interrupt him. Or no, he's like, look at me when I'm talking. Like he yells at her. He's very stern.
But that defines his character.
Kind of like, I guess he realizes that there's sort of deadly stakes and he takes things deadly seriously when he's in his rebel one. And we see him when he's kind of getting into, when he's on his ship having dropped off Andor, now under the name of Clem, and he's sort of going back to Coruscant. And you can see him sort of practicing his Coruscant airs. You know, he's put on all this jewelry. He's even got a wig, which explains, because in the trailer it wasn't clear whether we were going to get sort of like flashbacks or something like that. But yes, it's a wig that has sort of longer hair, and he's got his robes on and all this jewelry, and he's kind of practicing his mannerisms and things like that. And then we see later on when he is in his sort of antiquities store, sort of art gallery, as it were, receiving Mon Mothma. Obviously, it's kind of I think it's really clever. If you're going to have sort of like a guise of like shifting money or resources, stolen things, having sort of like an art gallery, you know, these are, as people with, you know, clever eye and screenshots abound, there are so many sort of little references in this, that this is not just sort of like paintings and things like that and interesting art sculptures. These are like relics that have been unearthed. You know, there is something that looks very akin to Starkiller's helmet in the back, and some other bits and pieces that look very familiar or referencing things. And I think that that's interesting, that perhaps ties into the fact that he's got a lot of underworld connections, or at least he's a very connected person, in order to source these kind of, you know, galactic, well, not trinkets, but these sort of really interesting pieces. And it also allows him to, it almost makes me think of the character in James Cameron's True Lies. She's like, she's using a sort of digging up these huge big sort of sculptures and things like that from sort of the ancient world to go and hide nuclear bombs inside. You know, you're using your sort of interesting connections in different countries and your ability to move, you know, obscure weird objects around without erasing too much suspicion. If he's getting in shipments from around the galaxy and helping smuggle things, being an art dealer is a pretty good way of kind of hiding that sort of smuggling, because he is the one that wants the box. So if there's somebody to move a very sort of hot item like the Star Path unit, that would be a good way to do it. You're sort of, it's an antiquity, you know, moving this rare piece across and, you know, put it inside something so it's disguised as something else. I thought that was fun.
Oh yeah, look, his character is super fun in all regards, and I hope we get a little more explanation about his backstory, because that both of the lives he's leading are actually very complex and imply quite a lot of history for both of them. In order to be a rebel leader that's capable of planning and leading and organizing an imperial heist, he must have a pretty significant backstory to have, you know, achieved that level and that skill set. But similarly, to be able to network to the point that he is on Coruscant, and just fit in perfectly, and, you know, be handling the amounts of money that he is because of the antiquities that he's handling, that implies a completely different skill set and a whole separate backstory. So he's done a lot of work in his life somehow.
Certainly in the real world, it's not just enough to have money. You have to sort of be connected and, you know, have influence and things like that. So you can't just come into Coruscant and, you know, pretend. No, you've got to establish your reputation, your sort of, So the way that he's sort of receiving senators and things like that, and it's all sort of, you know, very, very formal and very fancy and stuff like that. And then of course he uses the excuse to sort of be showing Mon Mothma an expensive rare gift. It gives them an excuse to sort of move into a sort of back, more secrety special room to have secret sort of discussions where they talk about sort of being watched and unable to move large sums of money around and things like that. So, and I did really appreciate this was our first episode featuring Mon Mothma. So we see her life. And I thought it was really interesting that immediately we go into that she has a husband, and her husband is sort of basically a Coruscant sort of socialite that doesn't care about her causes. He's not a rebel. No. Which really, for me, spoke to the fact, like, she talks about sort of being under siege, that she's got spies everywhere. And then we find out that her husband is not in on the rebel cause, that she's having to keep secrets from her husband.
He's mixing. He's mixing with people that we know are basically supporters of Palpatine.
Yeah, within sort of Palpatine's entourage.
Sly Moore is mentioned.
And just the sort of the, not exactly snarkiness, but the attitude between the two means that she doesn't even have sort of a safe space in her own home.
She's not a confident. No, she can't share what she's doing by any stretch.
No, and that makes me feel even sadder for the character, that this isn't, you know, she's sort of fighting on all fronts, even in the home. But I'm fascinated to learn more about her sort of home life, the dynamics there, and what exactly it is that she's trying to do. She talks about moving large sums of money around.
So what is the organizational
Is she trying to
state?
smuggle money to the rebellion?
So who are the leaders? What's the state of the organisation at this point? Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we know that it's been discussed at the beginning, and momentum of the rebellion's been discussed, a number of different times in the past. But since Rogue One, or in fact some aspects of Clone Wars, but emphasised in Rogue One, we're really getting this feel that the Rebel Alliance. Sure, it started technically at some point in time, but the rebellion is a consequence of lots of little pockets of rebellion just independently starting. So there are lots of different ways to describe the start of the Rebel Alliance and the rebellion, because it's just happening all over in opposition to the imperial fascism, frankly. And so I am keen to know what the actual state, who's involved in the Rebel Alliance establishment at this point. She makes reference to bringing people into the inner circle to help with funding, and we don't know who that necessarily is, whether or not Bail Organa is involved at this point, or that is who she may be referring to. He's obviously got a position, but might not be formally involved in this networking just yet.
Yeah. This was one of those episodes where it wasn't actiony. But I think because the story is pulling in the first 3 episodes, we were establishing Andor and the characters around Ferrix and Morlana. And now we're sort of moving on to this other sort of one where we're getting more about Luthen Rael, Mon Mothma, and the rebel sort of little unit that we have on Aldhani here. So we've got another sort of step of introductions and sort of setup here before we can really get into the next chunk. So it kind of feels like in the 3-episode chunks, we're now at the start of the next third.
The third episode, the finale of the first chapter, had a ton of action. Firefights, exploding vehicles and so forth, and escaping on speeder bikes. And that's probably where we're going to head with this next line. And I'm perfectly fine with them setting things up. And, I appreciate that it's a different, the overall vibe and tone is different from Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, and I don't hate that at all. I think there's different ways to tell stories, and this one's really emphasizing on slightly more significant history within the Star Wars galaxy. Book of Boba Fett talked about, things that are happening on Tatooine, but this is talking about the Empire versus the Rebellion and the status of that and the development of that. The
other thread I forgot to mention is, of course, the Imperial Security Bureau on Coruscant. So these are kind of basically like the spies of the Empire. They listen to intelligence reports, they go through bits and pieces. And so we are introduced to the blonde Imperial officer that we saw in the trailer, Lieutenant Dedra Miro. And we're seeing, I think it was really interesting. She sees something. She's obviously a younger sort of up and coming Imperial agent here. And she's battling a bit of bureaucracy and the kind of the constant push and pull for power that we know that we see sort of in the Empire. We see that a little bit in Rogue One with Krennic wanting to kind of climb the ranks. He's like, you'll speak to the Emperor about, what I've done. He wants authority, he wants power, he wants to climb the ranks. And we see that a little bit here. We see that the Empire is not fools here. We see that they are very calculating, and they are quick to kind of snap down anybody that looks like they are making overt moves for power. It looks like they are keeping tabs on everything. And we see some name drops of planets here as well. We hear Scarif mentioned, obviously a callback to Rogue One and a few other sort of things. They're keeping an eye on all sorts of things.
Fondor is an old one. It's not quite as overt, but it shows up in the EU going all the way back to the old comics. Arvala 6, I think. Arvala 7 showed up in The Mandalorian, but Arvala 6 is referenced. So yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. But I like the fact that she's passionate. She's not scheming for the sake of position. She sees something.
She wants to do the actual job, not just acquire power.
But she's dealing with perhaps a few others in her ranks that do see it as a little bit more of a power play.
I think she just wants to climb the ladder. They pretty much use that metaphor directly.
Yes. And I'm really fascinated by the other sort of prominent Imperial officers that we see in these scenes. The head of the bureau that seems to be, he sort of scolds her, but then compliments her, saying like, you've got a promising career, don't ruin it by sort of making the wrong moves too early. He's sort of like, you could have a really promising career. And I think it's interesting. And you can see that they don't, he sort of scolds somebody else in the room for basically taking too long to do the paperwork. And he's like, don't worry, you're clearly not going to do it. I'll reassign it. He's very quick, very snappy. And we can see that it's a pretty cutthroat environment to be in. If you've got what it takes, then you could rise pretty high. But if you stumble, the other wolves are going to cut you down pretty quick and snap up your work and sort of climb up the ranks. So I think that is a really interesting environment. I wasn't expecting to get a perspective from the Imperial side so early, or perhaps at all. It was kind of interesting. We know that if you're going to deal with the rebels, then they're going to have run-ins. We could see stormtroopers and Imperials in the trailer, but I didn't realize that we were going to get to see sort of an interesting inner workings. It felt like obviously Rogue One ties very closely into A New Hope, and with the Imperial sort of briefing room made me think of the scene with Tarkin and sort of the other officers on the Death Star in A New Hope. And it sort of felt like one of those moments where they're really reminding you that this is a story that ties into A New Hope. We're seeing the Imperials, talking about, the Galactic Empire is sort of from a higher point of not just stormtroopers and sort of brute force, sort of conflicts and things like that, but the way that they were sort of keeping tabs on all sorts of things. They talked about, conflicts and things getting stolen and just looking for, he goes on to sort of give a little bit of a spiel about how their healthcare, that they look for symptoms of the disease before it sort of festers and spreads and gets out of control, that they're not just paperwork, they're not just sort of office people, that they're a very crucial, important part of the Empire, and that they're looking for sort of signs of sort of rebel uprising so they can quash it before it gets too big and too organized. That's essentially what they're trying to do here.
It's an interesting approach because by focusing on the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, they're keeping a lid on how much of the Imperial activity they're describing so far. They're not really going into the Imperial Navy or so forth, but I think we're going to have to, because we do see Star Destroyers or a Star Destroyer in the trailer. So we're going to get a little bit more expansion beyond this tight-knit ISB unit. And just talking about how things tie into A&H. Obviously, we're not getting any direct references to, Darth Vader or Tarkin, Moff Tarkin at this point. But it'd be fun if we do just touch on that a little bit to tie it a little bit more overtly into Episode 1, I think without overcooking it.
Potentially, like not without, I never want to get too bogged down in speculation, but I would love to have, because he popped up in Kenobi, a cameo from a Palpatine. So I feel like they're deliberately dancing around about, they're not talking about the Emperor will be very pleased with your progress or anything like that. I think they're deliberately not mentioning him because there's potentials from both sides. We know that there is a Senate scene. We see Mon Mothma in a Senate scene. Yes. So who is going to be in the center of the Senate? It's going to be Palpatine. And I feel like they're deliberately not mentioning it. So it's a little bit more impactful when we do get to see him, because I really hope he's here. We don't get a lot of the Emperor in A New Hope. He sort of comes in later in the original trilogy. So it'd be kind of fun. And he's not even in Rogue One.
No.
He's not in A New Hope. He's not in Rogue One. So I think it would be really fun to have him in here just to kind of pull in a little bit of that sort of connection to the wider Star Wars saga.
I actually, I'm kind of keen to see some of the politics, some of the pre-A&H politics, frankly, because they won't have heard about the Death Star. So, I'm curious to see the state of the Empire pre-Death Star in some ways. We get informed about some aspects of it in Rogue One, but that is focusing on the Death Star on the whole. Prior to that, it'll be fun to explore a little bit. And the other main thread that we just be foolish not to talk about is Andor on the planet.
Yes.
On the planet Aldani, of course, where he's met the rebel group. We got your space sheep, we got your highland mountains and rivers and low flying TIE fighters. All of that stuff's pretty interesting and cool. Yeah.
We know that the Imperial location was filmed in a sort of a notable dam in Scotland. Yep. So we're getting these beautiful sort of Highland hills and things like that. Really sort of huge vistas that really make you feel like they're filming on location. The rebel group is sort of disguising themselves as sort of farmers, people that are sort of sort of nomads, the people that decided not to sort of go with the imperial sort of
into the
push
cities,
to push them into sort of settlements and things like that. They're sort of hiding in the hills. That gives them a sort of a legitimate reason, and should the Imperials sort of spot them. We do see TIE fighters here. Yep. It's always fun to see, as you later say, sort of TIE fighters in atmosphere, seeing them fly over sort of low-lying grass and hills and stuff like that. That iconic noise is always really fun to hear. We get to meet the Imperial officer from the base, who is clearly sort of turned to the rebel side, but is using his Imperial position akin to the female Imperial officer that we saw in Kenobi, somebody that's in the Empire and has decided to rather than sort of leave or sort of abandon their post, they're going to sort of strike back by staying where they are and using their intel and their position to help the outsiders. So that's really interesting. We find out that they are going to be stealing the quarterly payroll for this sort of garrison, this settlement here, and that Andor's going to be sort of crucial. We know from his discussion with Luthen Rael that Andor saw, or at least was stationed on Mimban during the fighting. Mimban, the conflict there was obviously seen in Solo. We saw Han sort of on the ground in Mimban. It was obviously a pretty desperate fight. But we find out that Andor's a little sly about this, that he sort of saw that he said that he was like, I was spent like 6 months on Mimban and I was the only one to survive. Action, And Luthen turns around and goes, no, you were a cook and you ran away. So we find that Luthen is incredibly connected. He knew everything about Andor before meeting him, and we know that Andor is pretty slick about
spinning a yarn.
About sort of covering his tracks, sort of fitting in. So he's perfectly, and perhaps Luthen chose Andor for that reason. He knows that he's very adaptable, he's very sort of quick on his feet, and would be the perfect person to put in. We don't specifically know. We know that the team seems aware that there is a higher up, because they seem to be aware that there is somebody, because she mentions it was either take him or call it off. They know that there's money coming from somewhere.
They've got to go somewhere. They've got to take it to someone. They can't manage it themselves.
They know that this is kind of being overseen, but they don't seem to be aware of exactly who. That Luthen is a secret to this group.
And I'm not quite sure exactly why that is.
Yes, I'm sure that we'll find out later. And we can see that this group is fairly apprehensive. We find out that they've been here for months, and that that Andor is being added to the group 3 days out from this heist, and they're all just a little uncertain about whether they can trust him. They know that their lives are on the line here, so they're very suspicious of him. We get to learn a little bit more about these characters, their dynamic. To be honest, I don't know if all of these characters are going to live to the end. Sometimes you sort of feel about that, especially since this is a predecessor to Rogue One, where we certainly saw, perhaps more characters not make it to the end than we initially thought.
Yeah.
And especially with sort of not that this is a large ensemble cast, but we've got a lot of threads here, and we don't necessarily know which of these characters to get invested in. Who knows? Maybe they all make it out successfully and it was all good and everything, and they're like, okay, Andor was successful here, let's go off to, heist number 2 or something like that. Who knows? It's Star Wars. We never know whether people are gonna, be the heroes and win the day, or whether it's all gonna go terribly wrong. So I guess we're gonna find out, in the next couple of episodes.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, the dynamic here. With the characters that were introduced, I'm really keen to see where this is going to go. And I did like the thing where they sort of, Luthen and Andor are negotiating and talking about sort of, Luthen gives him I think they call it a sky kyber. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a necklace with a blue and white kyber crystal on the end of it. It's clearly worth a lot of money. And that he says that if you're successful and you do the heist, I'll give you 200,000. We know that is a significant amount of money in the Star Wars universe, because Andor seemed incredulous about being offered 1,000 credits to tell him how he stole
the valuable
the box.
Star Pass unit was valued at about 40k.
Yeah, and that seemed to be like a lot of money.
Enough to get him off planet and
to sort of escape. Sort of the big emergency fund to kind of go off and start another life, and 1,000 seemed like a lot of money. So being offered 200,000, he's not exactly keen to do this job. He's like, I'll take the drop off. He wants to just be sort of, dropped off and thanks for helping me and so on. But I guess the sheer amount of money that's being offered here, And he sort of, talks about, I like that line that Luthen says that it's still the same rope that they'll hang you with. If you steal a tiny amount or millions of credits, they'll still kill you the same. So may as well, if you're going to steal something big. Just give it all sort of, and make a real difference against the Empire rather than just, what does he say, stealing trinkets and spitting in their food type thing. That's not really going to do much in fighting against the Empire. So I think I think the dialogue that Luthen has is really quite neat. I like his lines. Andor is a little quiet, but I like how strongly he stands up for himself. He's obviously had to stand up for himself since a very young age, but I really like the look at his character that we're getting here. And it feels very, very fitting with the Andor that we see in Rogue One. He's obviously still got a storyline development to completely link him up, because he is completely on board with the rebels when we meet him.
Yep.
He is a prominent, trusted figure who's being trusted with sort of very crucial missions. He speaks quite sort of freely. He doesn't need to ask permission to speak or anything like that when we see him in Rogue One. So it'll be really interesting to see his development here. He's still feeling a little bit selfishly. He's in it for the money here. He doesn't like the Empire. He's certainly willing to risk his life to sort of strike back against the Empire, but this is above and beyond what he's sort of been willing to do previously, when he sort of finds out that there's a whole garrison here, that this isn't just a heist, that this is a whole Imperial base that they'll be sort of taking on, and obviously the money is a significant amount to keep him there and to sort of join up.
So season 2 is going to be interesting, because it's going to be a lot quicker pace in terms of the time it spans, and it's going to join the lines from what we're seeing now to Rogue One. But in the meantime, we've got these 3 or 4 or 5 threads kind of set up. I'm really enjoying the way they've been established, and I'm looking forward to seeing them unfold and develop and intersect and overlap. And so that's episode 4. You may well have seen episode 5, and we're looking forward to talking about that in a lot more detail shortly. So tune into the SWNZ podcast to hear us talk about episode 5 of Andor very, very shortly. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications. But that's about it for today's installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you've got thoughts on the topics we discussed today, we're definitely keen to hear them. Let us know what Easter eggs you spotted in Luthen Rail's Antiquities store in the comments on the YouTube page or the website page for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news from New Zealanders, and another podcast episode next week. Don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia ora, kia noho, haumaru. Thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki, may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.